Today we're going to talk about how to tame your Taylor guitar with an ES-2 pickup system. But if you don't have a Taylor guitar with the ES-2 pickup system, don't worry. The things I'm going to talk about will apply to pretty much any acoustic electric guitar. Everything that you're doing wrong to plug it in that's giving you a bad sound, I'm going to tell you how to do it right. So stay tuned. Hey, you're watching Alamo Music TV. My name is Chris McKee with Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, turn on notifications, like our videos, and check out our podcast, the Fretboard Confessional, wherever you get your podcasts. So today I'm going to be talking specifically with this 114E from Taylor Guitar. We're going to be talking about the Taylor ES-2 pickup system that's in these guitars. And this applies pretty much to almost every single guitar that Taylor has in their lineup has the ES-2 pickup system element, at least with some varying preamps. But if you don't have a Taylor guitar with an ES-2 pickup system, that's okay. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about applies to all acoustic electric guitars, because what I've seen over the years, both working here and just playing with people both in churches and large venues and coffee shops, is that most guitar players do not understand their signal chain. They do not understand how they should be plugging their acoustic guitar system into an amp or a PA system. And then they are flummoxed as to why they are dealing with feedback, or they are dealing with just really bad sound from their guitar when other times it sounds great. So I'm going to break that down for you, talking about what you need to know both on the guitar and the rest of the signal chain to ensure that you get a good sound that's feedback free so you can enjoy a good performance. So let's start on the guitar itself. Now, as I said, this is a 114E. It has Taylor's ES-2 pickup system. Now, Taylor switched to this pickup system back in 2014 when they introduced the remodeled 814CE. And if you look at older Taylors, it can be a little confusing because the controls on the top look very similar to Taylor's going back to the early 2000s. And that's because their first proprietary pickup system, the ES-1, had the same control layout, these three knobs on the upper bout. Taylor's older than that had a Fishman system in them, for the most part, big barn door thing that had a microphone and a piezo pickup under the saddle, controls on the preamp on the side, and a lot of what I'm talking about would apply to those guitars as well. If you have an older ES-1 system, that is going to be a little bit different. There was no piezo equipment on there. It didn't have anything under the saddle. It used a neck pickup and body sensors, and it had a balanced output. So the first thing I'll tell you, if you have an ES-1 equipped Taylor guitar, the best thing you can do is use a balanced cable, which means a TRS tip ring sleeve, 1/4 inch going into the input jack on the guitar and an XLR on the other end. In fact, when Taylor produced that pickup, they actually sold those cables, but you can get them from a lot of various vendors. We stock them as well. And that is a balance signal that you can plug direct in and you're going to get a good sound. When they switched to the ES-2 system, that balanced output went away, and it's more like just about every other acoustic electric guitar out there. The only others that I can think of off the top of my head that have at various times had a balanced output are some Alvarez and some Takamine guitars. And there might be more if you know of guitars that come equipped with a balanced output that uses a TRS or an XLR connection. Leave them in the comments below. So you've got your Taylor guitar with an ES-2 pickup system. What does that mean? ES-2 is a combination of the preamp that have the controls up here and the pickup element that is down here in the bridge. Now it uses piezo crystal technology, which is pretty much what almost every single acoustic guitar pickup uses for the most part. Now these are piezo crystals that pick up the vibrations of the strings and amplify it through a preamp. Now what's different about the ES-2 versus most piezo pickups out there is that it is not under the saddle. So if you have a Fishman equipped guitar or you have an LR Baggs equipped guitar with an under saddle pickup, that's what we're talking about. The under saddle means that it's literally underneath the saddle. It is a ribbon or a hard element that has these piezo crystals in there. It sits under the saddle. It picks up the vibration of the strings through the saddle for each string. It has to be balanced. There's a whole lot of things about that we're not going to talk about, but it then turns that into a usable acoustic sound. Now, if you've ever heard of the kind of a piezo quack, this kind of sound that is on a lot of 90s Dave Matthews live album stuff, that's That's that piezo quack from a piezo crystal element sitting directly under the saddle. And it comes about because piezo crystals are a square law device. A piezo pickup basically takes an input of 1 and it turns it into 4. When it's under pressure, like it is under the saddle, it's basically being kind of over-amplified or overdriven, and you end up with that quacky sound. Now, some people love that, and if you do, put it in the comments below, and everyone who doesn't like it can berate you, and you can defend yourself, and it's the internet. Let's have fun. If you like that sound, that's great. You like what you like, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of acoustic guitar players, though, have sought to have a more natural sound. So what Taylor did with the ES-2 is they took that same piezo crystal technology, but instead of being under the saddle, it actually sits behind the saddle. There's 3 little dots here that sit between each string for good string-to-string balance, and in those dots is a piezo crystal element that's adjustable. Now from the factory, it's adjusted with the slightest bit of pressure barely touching the saddle, and that allows it to get a very natural response without having too much of that pressure already on it, so that it's not quacky, and yet you're getting a good high fidelity acoustic guitar sound out of it, even though it's really just taking that vibration and turning it into signal rather than what the guitar sounds like with the sound coming out of the sound hole. So in my opinion, it's a very natural sounding acoustic electric pickup. The only other things that could be more natural are microphones themselves, like an LR Baggs Anthem or a Lyric, and those types of pickup systems that primarily rely on a microphone can have their own problems as well, which we can address at another part of this video. But for this is along the same lines of the technology in almost every single acoustic electric guitar out there, whether it's a 114E from Taylor, a K24 CE from Taylor, it's an under saddle style if it's like a Fender acoustic electric guitar, Guild, etc. So you've got this pickup, it's picking up the vibrations, and then it's going through a preamp. Now that preamp might be in the sound hole of the guitar, it might be in a preamp on the side, or like in the case of this Taylor guitar, it's here on the top. Now every single one's going to be different. You might have just volume and a basic tone control, which gives you very little control over your lows and highs and mids and so forth. You might have sweeping EQ where you can dial a lot of that in along with a phase switch on a preamp, or on a Taylor guitar you have 3 basic knobs, and it's important to understand what they do. So let's talk about them. This closest knob to the top, this is your volume knob. Now you should know that each of these knobs has a center detent on it, which means as you move it through its range of motion, you feel this notch kind of in the middle position. And that's a good kind of reference point both for these EQ knobs that I'll talk about, but also for the volume knob. You can set up your guitar to have that center detent be your primary main volume that you want to be, and then if you need to turn up and mix with other people, as long as you've given yourself enough headroom, you could turn up and max it out or find some place along that range. Or for some people, you might just always run it at max, and that way you know that you're getting good signal out of it. There's pros and cons that we'll talk about, but that is your volume knob. If you have a Taylor ES-2 equipped guitar that does not have that center detent, just know that over the years, Taylor's always looking to refine their preamps, and there are preamp designs out there that have the detent or don't have the detent. There's also some that have more gain than others, and so that gain aspect comes into play when we're talking about the rest of the signal chain. If you own multiple Taylors, as I know some friends of mine do, some of them might have more gain than others, and it's important to understand this when you're plugging in and switching between different guitars, because it's going to affect the rest of the line. But that's your volume control, the one closest to the soundboard. Next you have treble, and then you have bass. Now this is an active EQ. So if you think of the center detent as starting at 0, okay, you can either add treble or bass, or you can take away treble or bass. Now notice that there's not a mid-range control on this. What you can think of on this guitar is that mid-range is basically set at that midpoint. If you want to spike those mids, if you want to have a more mid-heavy acoustic guitar sound, then you want to turn down both your bass and your treble guitar, and then they will be dropping below that preset midpoint for the mid-range frequencies. If you want to scoop the mids, which is a sound typical of a rosewood and spruce guitar, then you would turn both of them up. A lot of people who are singer-songwriters like to EQ in this way because it's your natural voice is kind of a mid-range, so you can bring the trebles up a bit, bring the bass up a bit, and then you're scooping that mid-range a bit, and your voice is kind of filling out the middle part. Now, keep in mind that these are powerful adjustments with the volume and with the EQ. And my advice to you is to embrace the idea that less is more. If you're wanting a bassier sound, don't turn the bass up all of the way. There's probably something else that we can do further down the line in the mix, even with the playing styles, all sorts of stuff. If you introduce too much of either of these, you're probably not going to get a good sound that you want. In fact, if you add too much bass, you're going to deal with feedback. It's going to be very, very common because low frequencies travel further than high frequencies. And I'll give you a little example to prove what I'm talking about. Have you ever been kind of in the vicinity of a football stadium where a band is playing? You don't hear the trumpets, you don't hear anything like that. What you're hearing is like the bass drum, right? You're hearing that kind of echo. You could be a mile away and you're going to pick up on those low frequencies. Same thing, you're standing outside of a club and a band's performing. What are you hearing? You're hearing the bass. You're not hearing the guitar shredding through the walls. Most often you're hearing those low frequencies because those are what travel the furthest. So if you take that knowledge and you apply it to how you're mixing your guitar, if you add too much bass into your signal, then what's going to come out, all of that bass is going to reach your guitar, and you're going to, I promise you, deal with feedback issues, more so than if you have that bass at a reasonable level, okay? So different pickup preamps, like I said, will have less controls than this or more controls than this. A lot of times when they're on the side, they also have controls for what we call phase. Now, the Taylor ES-2 pickup system also has a phase switch, and it's important that we talk about it because it's not on the outside of the guitar, but it can come in handy with the thing that I just discussed, and that's feedback. So inside on the preamp, if you look in the sound hole of your guitar, you'll see a circuit board. That's where all of the preamp circuitry is, and on the end of that is a white switch. It's a small switch. You can reach in and you can grab it with your finger if you have long enough fingers. I don't have very long fingers, and I can still reach it when I reach in from the upper part of the sound hole without loosening strings or anything. Now, what does the phase switch do? I'm glad you asked. A phase switch is often on a preamp equipped guitar, but not always. I rarely see one if the guitar has sound hole controls, but you will also see it on a lot of preamps that you use on the floor or direct boxes if they're active. A phase switch inverts the phase of the frequencies on the low end of what's coming out of the guitar. So think about it this way. If you're strumming your guitar, you've got it set up, and you're starting to have feedback. Basically, what's coming out of the guitar, going into the sound system, and coming back out is coming back into the guitar. And those sound waves have a particular shape to them. When those matching waves hit the instrument that's producing the sound, it amplifies. You have an increase in the multitude of amplification that takes place, and you get feedback. That's basically how it works. So how can you defeat feedback? Well, primarily you'd want to deal with it with gain and proper EQ of the instrument. But phase can also be a tool in your arsenal. By changing the phase on it, you're inverting or changing what that wave is coming out of the guitar, and so that when it goes through the sound system and comes back, it's less likely to feedback. Now, I will say that if you have bad EQ, too much bass, too much gain, along with like hot spot monitors in your face, there's only so much any of these controls can do. So it's good practices along the way to address all of these things. But if you ever wondered what phase does, that's what phase does. Now, some people would ask, well, if that's the case, why have a switch? Why not just have it like out of phase all of the time? Well, what is and is not out of phase varies depending upon the equipment you're plugging into and everything. But the other thing is that when you turn something out of phase, it tends to thin the sound of it quite a bit. So if you have ever watched any of our demos when we're talking about electric guitars where you can put the pickups out of phase, what you typically get is a thin and quacky sound because you've changed the phase of the low frequencies and it thins it out. Now that can be a very cool sound on an electric guitar. On an acoustic guitar, it tends to just be a thin sounding amplified acoustic tone that people don't like. And you then have to address that thinness with EQ and try to find the balance so that you're not dealing with feedback and you have a good sound overall. So hopefully that helps. That's what phase is. So that's what's on the guitar, okay? So if everything on the guitar is working great, you set up your volume and your EQ, and I again would recommend going minimum, not big changes. In fact, flat is usually a good way to go on the guitar. I typically run most ES-2 equipped guitars that I've ever plugged in flat on the guitar. The only time I really ever adjust the EQ is if I need to within a mix of other people. So if I'm getting lost in the mix with other instruments, I might adjust it on the guitar. But for the most part, I try to run it flat because I'm going for a very natural acoustic guitar sound. Now, out of the 1/4-inch connection on the bottom tail block of your acoustic guitar, you're going to plug in a 1/4-inch cable. Now, where's that cable going to go? I'm glad you asked that question. So it depends, right? It depends if you are plugging into a PA system, which is a term, public address system. It's kind of an outdated term, but think of it as a sound system at a venue, at your church, what have you, where you've got a mixer and amps and high array speakers with subs and crossovers and all of that stuff, okay? You can plug into that style of system in a mixing board, or maybe you're just plugging into an amp, an acoustic guitar amp. So if you're plugging into an acoustic guitar amp, you can probably just plug directly into the acoustic guitar amp, provided that it's near you and that your cable run is not more than about 25 feet. You're generally going to be okay if you have an active preamp on board on the guitar, you've got active EQs on that acoustic guitar amp, and it's basically acting like a small PA. And when I say that, what I mean is, unlike an electric guitar amp, you've got low range, mid range, and high range on that acoustic guitar amp, so you can get the full spectrum of an acoustic guitar sound. If your amp is further, if your cable run in total, that's important to remember, is further than 25 feet to that amp, or it's further than 25 feet to a mixer. I've got a small little Yamaha MG10XU mixer here. If you're plugging into something like this from more than 25 feet away, or an amp more than 25 feet away, then you need something like this. Now this is called a direct box. This is a passive direct box. And there's all sorts out there. There's passive ones, there's active ones. There's also kind of combinations that are preamp units, similar to I'm going to say it wrong again on this video, the LR Bags voice print, not tone print. So voice print DI is an example. I've been using an LR Bag session DI for years. These are direct boxes, but they also have a lot of controls on them. Controls for EQ and notch filters, and in that case of the voice print, it's modeling for voice and all the special EQ. But at the heart of it, what you need is something, even something basic like a passive DI box, in order to deal with the signal coming out of your guitar, running over distances, and going into a mixer. Why? Well, the signal coming out of your guitar is called high Z. It's a high impedance signal. And that works fine for short runs. But over long distances, you deal with noise, you can deal with interference. You basically get bad sound going into any kind of a mixer. And that's whether you're plugging directly into a mixer or you're going into a stage snake. So, for instance, if you're at church, a lot of times I'm hearing guys that had old guitars and they buy a new Taylor and they go to their church and they go to plug it in and they're like, my sound guy's telling me it sounds bad. And maybe that's a professional sound guy, or maybe it's a volunteer sound guy, and all of you are just trying to figure out how to get it to sound good. Well, this is usually the first step. You need a DI. Now, a passive DI uses circuitry in order to change that high impedance signal to a low impedance signal. And a low impedance signal, whether it's from a microphone or an acoustic guitar through a DI, can run 1,000 feet without any problem whatsoever. You're going to get a good sound, low noise floor on it, and it's going to go into the mixer without any interference or picking up anything that's going to degrade or basically mess up the sound. If you don't use something like this, then the sound that could be coming out, regardless of how well you EQ it or set up your gain stages, which we'll talk about, might sound distorted. And that distorted sound is coming from noise getting picked up on the run from the high impedance signal coming out of your guitar. So, first thing you should be plugging into out of your guitar is probably a DI, okay? Active or passive. Now, let's talk about what's going on at the mixer, because this is an important thing too. At your mixer, this one doesn't have sliders, okay? It's just got your volume knob. But you have what's called a gain stage, and then you have your overall volume. Now, they're both basically different gain stages used to mix the signal for the environment that you're going to be in, okay? Whether it's a recording environment or it's a live environment. When your acoustic guitar running through the DI, right, hits the signal with a balanced low impedance signal into your mixer, the first thing that you want to do is you want to set your gain based upon how you have it set up on your guitar and if there's anything else in the signal chain. What do I mean by that? Remember the volume knob that we talked about on the Taylor. If you always have your volume knob at the middle, you set your gain, or your sound person sets the gain based upon the sound of the signal coming in from the guitar. And you want this to have a healthy gain. You don't want it to be peaking. That means lights are turning orange and red and the sound that you're getting is distorted. Okay, you don't want that. You want a good natural sound with plenty of headroom so you can have dynamics. If you set this and then later turn your guitar up, you may peak the gain on the mixer, and then you're dealing with not really an increase in volume, but a saturation of the signal that leads to unwanted distortion. Okay, this is not the time where we want distortion, and we're not looking for a stop box pedal to do it. This is the unwanted kind. So you want to set this in relation to how you have your guitar set. And if the guitar changes or anything else in the signal line changes, if you have a DI and you've got it knocking down some of the decibels, some of the level rather, and then you turn that off, you have to adjust this here. Now, then within the mix, you're going to have a separate volume control, which is basically just your line level after your gain has been set here. What I see too many people do is just max that out. And if you do that, I guarantee you are overdriving the signal and you will end up with a distorted sound that doesn't sound good. The other thing that I see a lot is people not realizing that there are various gain stages in their signal line. So, say you're coming out of the guitar, you've set your volume there. If you are using any effects, some of those effects will also likely have their own gain level. So some reverbs have their own gain level, choruses will have their own gain level, some delays do, some delays don't. And sometimes those are passed through, but sometimes they're buffered, which is doing something to the signal chain as well. And so every step along the way that you're plugging into something, there's several things happening. One, you have an increase in cable length. Two, you may have possibly a new gain stage that you have to deal with when it comes to what's going on here. So, out of the guitar, set your volume into your effects and or into your DI and effects if you've got them, okay? Pass from the DI through your snake or directly into the mixer. You need to set your gain at the mixer and then set your level. Now you want to EQ, and I recommend EQing before you really mess with effects of any kind, because you want to hear the sound that you're happy with on your guitar later than affected. Here's my recommendation for this. It's very similar to what I recommend on the guitar. Start flat. And then, and this is what a lot of people don't do, use subtractive mixing. And what I mean by that is if you want more bass, instead of adding more bass, start by pulling down your treble and mids. Pull down from middle rather than adding from middle as a default behavior. That doesn't mean that you won't ever boost something above that middle mark, okay? But I'm going to suggest that you're going to get better results if you start flat and EQ down and then add as needed in order to finally meet that signal. The last thing I'm going to tell you about the ES-2 pickup system specifically is that it's a very natural, very balanced sound right out of the box. And the thing that I see most people do is add bass when you don't need to. In fact, the thing that became apparent to me when we messed with the voice print is that the nature of the design of the pickup, where it's not under pressure, means that it is very sensitive to the strings and even hitting the top and stuff. There's a good bass response out of the box, and it's easy to overdo it. And the minute you do, you're going to have too saturated of a signal, you're probably going to deal with gain issues, and you're definitely going to deal with feedback if you're in any kind of a very live environment. So this is a really, really good pickup system, and pretty much any acoustic electric guitar with a pickup system can be dialed in to suit your needs. You just have to understand everything along the way. Hopefully this video is helpful in helping you diagnose your current issues or understanding how to get everything set up going forward so you have good results. If you have any thoughts in addition that I haven't shared or things that you've experienced, let me know in the comments below so that everybody can benefit from our shared knowledge together. And if you need help setting up a signal path for good success in whatever venue you're doing, we can help you with that. Just go to alamomusic.com, chat with someone online. We can help you put the right gear together to suit your needs. At the end of the day, the best guitar in the world is the one that you're playing, and we want it to sound good amplified. So keep playing, follow these rules, you'll get good results, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.